So I'd like, there's still a buzz in the room. I don't know if it was the music or if it was the presentation. But in any event, it's time to transition to our next presentation, which is a panel presentation. So I'd now like to invite Neen Cravanelt and our panelists to the stage for the next session, which is on reducing poverty in Canada, basic income, the next frontier. Neen is the owner of Imagination FX and a community development specialist. She's a member of the Huspetech Nation, one of the 14 Nuu-chah-nulth nations. As a First Nations change agent, she has firsthand experience of Indigenous issues and has committed her entire professional career to improving social, community, and economic conditions for Aboriginal people in British Columbia. Neen will be moderating our session this morning on reducing poverty in Canada. Basic income, the next frontier. Joining Neen on stage, and so this is your cue to actually come up on stage for the people that are on the panel, because you're all firmly seated, and I'm like, come on. So come on up. So joining Neen on stage are Alana Balser, Chair of Hamilton's Organizing for Poverty Elimination, HOPE, and Sheila Regier, Chairperson of Basic Income Canada Network.
I'm sorry we don't get any AC/DC to walk onto the stage too. Maybe we'll get some Pink Floyd money at the end. I can put it out there. Our AV guys are awesome. I think they can pull it off. It's a real pleasure to be here with you on day two, and just really honored to introduce my new friends, Sheila and Alana. And I'm totally going rogue and not reading their bios because I had the pleasure to meet them and connect with them this morning, and I would much rather share some interesting fun facts about them. So starting with Sheila, for those of you who are still working on your bingo card, you would like to probably see Sheila at the end of this session for 4 different categories. So Sheila's pretty cool. She has helped someone file their income tax. She has a personal budget. She has saved for a down payment on a house. And she is a presenter at this conference. So if any of those squares are vacant on your card, please see her afterwards. She can help you out. Some other fun facts about Sheila. This is her first time walking in heels. I thought she did a lovely job. Yeah. And what else can I tell you about Sheila? It's also her first time wearing bifocals for this presentation. So the first time being able to see the audience. So if you guys want to make faces at her to make sure that she can actually see very well, you're invited to do so. And a fascinating fact that she shared with me, we were just talking about research and what kind of appeals to us in this whole realm of financial wellness. And she was sharing that she's noticing that there's a growing movement in multi-faith research on basic income. And much of that research was focused around, actually more focused on some of the problems associated with too much wealth. So I found that quite fascinating. So that's a little bit about Sheila. And let me see, what could I tell you about my new friend Alana? I just sat with her for 5 minutes and my cup is full. I'm very inspired by her journey so far and not even knowing the whole story. So I think that she's going to be a lovely treat for us today. Alana is a volunteer and an advocate, and my experience and my connection with her, I would categorize you as an inspirational change agent, and she is really focused on eliminating poverty. Her favorite money song is Price Tag by Jessie J. And she has celebrated living with basic income starting in November, and she's going to share a bit about that experience with us. So I'm quite excited to hear a bit more about that. But living with basic income has really changed her life in a number of ways. And 2 of the kind of significant moments that she shared with me is that she was able to purchase a computer, a brand new computer, and she has all the bells and whistles on it. She was quite excited to share that with me. And she also, this was the first winter that she was able to buy a brand new winter coat, ever. So those are significant things that some people may take for granted, but made a big difference for this lovely lady on stage. I also learned that she shares her fries. So we've had a story of sharing bread this morning, and she shared her McDonald's fries with a friend since being in Vancouver. And fascinating fact, she's a survivor and a thriver, and she shared that one of the times that she was wearing a dress with sneakers, not heels, she did a full-on, would you give it a 10 out of 10? Yeah, a full 10 out of 10 mop out in front of City Hall. So these are our friends who are going to be sharing their little stories with us today. And I just wanted to kind of frame the kind of basic income, kind of piggyback on some of the words of our other speakers. I know that one of the focuses for this conference was to be able to apply an Indigenous lens in a number of areas. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context on basic income from an Indigenous lens. And I'm going to also piggyback on one of the previous speakers, Queston, who shared our old laws are becoming our ways of the future. So thank you for that. And I'm going to share a story that ties in with that. So pre-contact, our people were very wealthy in so many ways. We were stewards of our own destiny. We were stewards of our lands, our resources, our people, our communities. And no one knew poverty. Any of the literature that you will read from early explorers will indicate that our people did not know poverty. And that's because we all had a role and responsibility within our family structures and within our clans and within our communities. So, pre-contact, our wealth was actually measured by what we could give away. And so New Chonolf, which is where I'm from, we have a potlatch system, and our chiefs gave away at potlatches. They gave their gifts, and that was a demonstration of wealth. So, coming back, our old ways are becoming, or our old laws are becoming our laws of the future. We also look to Mother Nature and Creator and to nature as indicators. So, Canadian geese, have any of you seen Canadian geese since you've been here? I noticed some on our walk the other day. And any of you who came to my pre-conference workshop know that I love free, no cost, low cost. So I'm going to do a plug for thesimpletruths.com. Here you can get these little video clips. They're all less than 5 minutes, and they're just all about lessons on life and values on life. And one of my favorites is one on the Canadian geese. And what we can learn from Canadian geese is that they take turns being leaders. And when one gets tired, they'll fall back, and somebody else will come up to the front. And the formation that they fly in, they're flying V, they fly in that manner because it helps propel the group. They work as a collective. And if one is falling back or is sick or dying, two will go with it and stay with it. And I can't remember who one of our previous speakers talked about, people dying alone. And Indigenous people were noted as being one of the groups that in this particular story that did not die alone. We take care of each other. And again, for those of you in the pre-conference workshop, there's so much value and strength and lessons to be learned in the quote, take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of this place. And to me, that's how basic income really, those are all kind of linked and tied together. And I'm going to turn it over to our speakers to elaborate on that even more. But first I'm going to throw the PowerPoint thing.
So good morning, and thank you very much. And this is like one of these doo-doo moments. I had no idea about that geese story. This, for me, this was just a photo that was taken when I was out walking with my grandkids one day, and it's like spring for me, which is so long in coming to Toronto. This is thrilling. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me for this. I'm happy to be here. I'm so glad that Neen covered the humorous part of this, because I've been asked to cover an awful lot in 15 minutes. So, there's no humor, not many stories. I've had to cut some of those out, but Alana's story is so powerful. That's wonderful. So I'm going to cover a number of things. I'm going to talk about the sort of nuts and bolts of basic income, what we know at this point about it, and then talk about a little bit about what this looks like going forward and what our future looks like. So one of the most important messages that I want to deliver right at the start, and Monsieur Duclos has kind of stolen my thunder in a bit in this regard, because the idea of basic income, as he explained, is not new, it's not radical, and it's not hypothetical. It exists, but it doesn't exist for everybody. The other important message for me is that the need for it is accelerating, and that there's cause for a lot of hope, particularly in Canada. So on to the nuts and bolts. What is basic income? So according to BICN, Basic Income Canada Network, the organization that I chair, it's income sufficient to meet basic needs and live with dignity regardless of work status. So that's essentially money with no strings attached, or not a lot of behavioral conditions and not judgment about what you do with your money. How does it work? So I think the easiest way to explain this is, I mean, there's a lot of talk about pilots these days, but I want to talk about actual programs that people know and understand that we've already talked about a little bit, but we often don't understand them in the context of being a basic income. So my first example comes from Alaska, because a lot of people in the world seem to know about this. So when Alaska discovered resource wealth, it decided, quite rightly, that the benefits of that wealth should belong to Alaskans. And probably the most direct way of ensuring that Alaskans got that benefit was to provide it to them directly as a cash transfer. So the amount varies depending on how the permanent fund is doing, but in general, the way it works is that annually, whatever the dividend is, it would go to every individual. So this is kind of like the universal basic income demogrant model that you hear talked about. So if you're a family of 4, 2 parents and 2 children, and the dividend that year is $1,000, then your family will get $4,000. So it's not sufficient, it's not adequate to get you out of poverty, for example, but for a lot of families, it really is a significant help for them and an equalizer for the population, so that Alaska, more so than many other states, has less poverty and less inequality. The second example, again, I think probably the best one, are seniors' benefits in Canada. So this kind of shows you the whole panoply of how it can work, because old age security is sort of like a demogrant. So it goes to everybody. I mean, once you're 65, minimal residency requirements and, that sort of thing. But in general, you're 65, you get your OAS because you're Canadian. As you get up the income ladder and you get a little bit wealthier, you have other sources of income, some of that is going to start to be clawed back, which is important because the basic income is not there to just enrich those who already have lots of resources. But the second part of seniors' benefits is the guaranteed income supplement, which operates according to what we prefer to call a sort of refundable tax credit model. It's what Milton Friedman would have talked about as a negative income tax model. We don't like those words because they're negative, and people hate tax, and combining negative and tax together is just like run out of the room. So, but this refundable tax credit model is essentially a progressive system where the fewer other resources you have at your disposal, the greater your income is going to be from this benefit. The third one I won't talk about too much now because, again, it's been covered very well, child benefits. So even though, as Minister Duclos said, that in 2016 there were significant improvements to this benefit, Canada actually has 20 years of history now. And I was working inside federal government when this whole sort of revolution in the way child benefits were administered started coming to the fore. So it's huge. There's a pilot running in the United States now trying to do something similar on a very small scale, and they might have been able to just look north and, avoided their costs. I don't know. But it's very significant. It provides enormous amount of security for families. If we had more time, I have a lovely story to tell you. Can't do it. The fourth area, The fourth one I want to talk about is the GST credit, simply because it is, in some senses, the most unconditional because it doesn't have age or family status limits. And for some people, it is the only secure income that you are ever going to get at this point, particularly in Alberta. For a single person, if your social assistance regime decides they don't like you and they've cut off your benefit, the only guarantee you will get is the federal GST credit. So from that perspective, it's about as universal as you can get, but it's very tiny. So the next one, I'll run through this really quickly, what basic income is not. So it's not social assistance, and there is no way you can dress up social assistance to pretend that it's getting anywhere close to a basic income. They are opposites. It is highly stigmatizing, highly conditional, punitive. We all know about that. Basic income is not a magic bullet. It's not going to do everything on its own. That it needs to be involved in, it needs to be complemented by a number of other measures. It's also, and in some versions there were disagreements about this, but in our version, it is certainly not a replacement for public services, labor legislation, financial regulation, and all of the other things around it that you need in a modern society. The next slide, and this gets back to what Neen was talking about earlier. I want to talk a little bit about what does dignity have to do with it, because that's key in our definition. And so this is part of why, helping to understand that this is not a new concept as well. The concepts of basic income, things like that there's a common wealth to be shared, that there's a common good to be pursued, that there's a common human dignity and freedom to be respected, that's one that underlies every major faith tradition, including Indigenous ones, as well as human rights instruments and other ethical principles. So potlatch that Neen mentioned is an example of that. There's a similar kind of mechanism called zakat in Muslim traditions and in Christian traditions, there's this idea of periodic debt forgiveness. So all of these are, they're not just about income, they're not just about sharing resources. The point of them is that they help maintain social ties. So that's really critical. I also wanted to mention that, we've done a little bit of research that there are some Government of Canada treaties with First Nations that actually would be providing basic income now to a lot of First Nations people had they been honored. So again, it's something that's existed for a while. Now let's turn to what do we know? And again, I'm going to run by this fairly quickly. I apologize I just feel like there's so much here. So what we know comes from pilots in the 1970s and from now around the world, and from a lot of programs that have already been running for a while, as well as a lot of other evidence that we've been gaining from psychology, from neuroscience, all sorts of things that help us understand who we are as humans better. Within this bit of sort of evidentiary overview of what we have, I want to talk about three key areas that are sort of the elephants in the room always, or key challenges, and those are related to work. So if you give people, we hear this all the time, if you give people free money, they will all be lazy and ill-behaved. Second major challenge is cost. So a lot of people will agree, maybe this is a nice idea, we can't afford it. The third one is more political, and we hear this too, that maybe it's a nice idea, but it's just not feasible. The powers that be will never allow this to happen. So the first one I want to talk about is work. And we have in our societies come to this very strange narrowing of our understanding of work to usually mean employment in the paid marketplace. And they're not the same thing. Work is so much larger, it's so much more encompassing of the human work we do outside the market and the work that the robots are less likely to be able to take on very soon. And in all of the research that we have from these pilots, there really is no evidence at all that people reduce work effort. with a basic income. In fact, they often increase and they may work differently. So I want to tackle this lazy idea and the idea of work disincentive through one story I know from a woman I met a number of years ago. It's a happy story because she was on her way to improving her education and getting into university, bettering her life. But just prior to that, she was a young Black immigrant lone parent in the Jane Finch area in Toronto, so I'll call her Jane, not her name. She had 2 children. She was living on social assistance. And so the way Ontario and the federal government benefits work at that point, half her income came from child benefits that arrived towards the end of the month. The other half of her income came from social assistance, and because of her housing arrangements, went directly to her landlord. This left her on the 2nd of the month with $4 for the next 3 weeks. So we're talking to Jane, we're going, so like, how do you do it? What do you do? How do you manage? And she said, basically, I do nothing. I try to do as little as possible because if I do anything, I get hungry and that will take food away from the kids. So if that's not a work disincentive, I don't know what is. And there are so many stories like that. I have lots I could tell here. Time is marching on. I next want to focus on health and education, and there's a lot of really interesting backstory to this, incredible information that came out of the experiments in Dauphin, Manitoba in the 1970s, because health and education records were tied to some of the work that was being done with this MINCOME experiment. But we also know from evaluations and from some independent research on child benefits as well, and all of the other pilots, that consistently, I mean, the details change, but consistently, you see improved health in the family, especially for children. You see improved education opportunities. You see empowerment for women, which again improves education opportunities for children and that sort of thing. You see reductions in mental health and physical health problems. The patterns are so similar, it's amazing. And then the flip side of that is that all of the bads, the ill behavior that we think of, single people smoking and drinking away their free money kind of thing, again, we see the opposite. Alcohol and tobacco consumption go down. Violence within the home and the community goes down. So the second big elephant in the room, as I mentioned, is always cost. And I don't want to get into too much detail in this, and I don't really want to talk about numbers, but somebody yesterday was talking about the individual experience of poverty being expensive. Well, on a national level, poverty is expensive too. We seem to think somehow that we are not paying for our current problems, and we are. If we fix those problems, we save a lot of money downstream. So when you're thinking about the cost of a program, you think what you get out of it. I think I'll leave some of the rest of it for questions and go on to feasibility. I've given you some examples here of things that, so many things seem impossible when you start out. My children and grandchildren are the descendants of slaves. This is close to me, and I've done a lot of sort of literature research on slavery and the history and the abolitionist movement and that sort of thing. That, more than just about anything else, seemed to be something that was impossible. Like the idea that the American economy could survive without slavery was considered impossible. And yet, people worked and we overcame those problems. Basic income can be done. I mean, we're halfway there. So that brings me now to the present and the future, and why basic income matters so much now. So any of you who have been reading papers and seen things about this, we know that one of the main arguments is the robots are coming. We all know we've done so much work on poverty and having so much trouble budging the markers. So I think what's on the screen there, I can't quite see that because my peripheral vision with my new bifocals is limited. But in my notes, I don't want to talk about the problems. I want to talk about the way basic income offers a paradigm shift in how we think about some of these things. So again, not a magic wand, but it can immediately start directly reversing the inequality and insecurity that's accelerating with poverty deepening and the middle class living on debt. It can kickstart a stagnant and imploding economy, enabling people to participate in the market and the non-market economy. It can tackle poverty directly where other things have failed. It can concretely provide the means to get an education, to train, to retrain, to move to get a better job, to stay where you are, to help your community develop. It can deliver a measure of resilience and stability as the robots keep taking over. It can enable us to buy the stuff that the robots are producing, because otherwise, what will we do? We can start rebuilding the security that used to characterize the middle class and doesn't anymore. We can enable investment in more sustainable and climate-friendly endeavors. We can restore democracies that are under threat from divisive and extremist views, scapegoating, lack of trust in government, which we talked a lot about yesterday, and that enables people to become more constructively involved in community and public life. So going forward, so imagine the work that you do. Imagine how much more rewarding it would be if the people you work with actually had some income to help manage better. Imagine that volatility was reduced. Imagine that they could make the kinds of, really good decisions that we want everybody to be able to make, because there are real options available now. And then I imagine that probably lots of you have evidence of how a kind of a basic income idea could actually work and make it a reality for the people who have so far been left out, people like Alana, who's now got her chance as being part of the Ontario Basic Income Pilot in Hamilton. So last page, end of my talk. If you want more and better, there are resources on our website. There's a primer that goes through a lot of the very basic ideas that help you engage in the conversation around basic income. There's a description of the basic income we want, a very progressive one. And my last public service announcement is that we are in the process of organizing in 2.5 weeks now, I think, the 17th Annual North American Basic Income Congress in Hamilton at McMaster University. You go on the website and you're interested, it's still not too late to register. There are so many people coming, it's going to be amazing. Thank you.
Hello, I hope everyone's enjoying the amazing weather and opportunities just to see this beautiful province. I wanted to start off with a quote from Anne Frank, which is that how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. So and that's a quote that I've led my life by. Growing up with a mother on social assistance, welfare, or Ontario Works, and then eventually going on to Ontario Works myself, because when you grow up in a family where you're on social assistance, there isn't a whole lot of expectation or opportunity for you to be able to go beyond high school, to go beyond a minimum wage job at Tim Hortons or McDonald's. It very rarely exists. Growing up, we didn't have food a whole lot. Most times we didn't eat a lot because OW would, and I apologize, I refer to welfare as OW in Ontario, Ontario Works. They arbitrarily suspend you. My mom has had her case file suspended and closed well over 50 times in my life. There have been multiple occasions of having to reach out to the MPP office to restore my mom's social assistance check. And as a result of that, we grew up very deprived. Didn't eat a lot, didn't have proper clothing. As mentioned with my winter coat, I've never had the opportunity to purchase a brand new winter coat. Most of the time, in poverty, you get handed a coat, you have no say and this may be very vain, but you don't have a say in the design or what it likes or whether you like it. All that matters is if it's warm. And It's not right for anyone to grow up like that, knowing that you won't have the opportunity in life that your classmates have, or just the life your classmates have, and security in knowing that you have food on your table every night. You have parents who care about you. When you're in poverty, it's very expensive to live in poverty. It's also very exhausting. Looking for work is very hard because you've got to split your day. You've got to either look for money or find a way to get food, which means trekking through the various food banks if you're even eligible to visit that food bank that particular month or time. And it's not right. You get so exhausted just struggling to be able to eat, to survive. How are you supposed to find work when you can't even find food for the day or pay your rent money? Now, when I left my mother, I went on to OW myself for a few years, and I do have to be completely honest about my personal experience with OW outside of my mom's was I didn't have any of the issues my mom had with OW. I very lucked out and had some really excellent workers with welfare, which very rarely happens. I then transitioned over to ODSP, which, while better than OW, it's only marginally better. You still have to do the same. There's no dignity attached in social assistance. You get a $50 birthday gift. It has to be reported to your worker so they can deduct $25. You get any sort of pay, it all gets deducted, which doesn't allow you to get ahead in life. Now, last year when the basic income pilot was announced, I was happy, but I was worried because they hadn't sorted out a lot of the details about it yet. They had initially said they were going to do mail-outs for those who had been accepted for basic income. That didn't work out too well for the government, so they ended up doing application sessions. Initially, I wasn't going to apply because there wasn't dental attached with basic income, and growing up in poverty, my teeth are in such a bad permanent state at this point that I can't drink cold drinks unless I have a straw. It's just too painful, frankly, and a lot of that goes back to lack of proper dental care, lack of nutrition, not being able to eat what your teeth need in order to stay strong and healthy. And then I heard that, yes, they were going to include dental. If you were on ODSP, they would agree to continue the drug and dental coverage. So I chose to stay. I applied, and then I'm like, I don't have the luck. I'm not going to get approved for it. And then I got approved for it. What was even more surprising was my mom also applied, and she also received basic income. We weren't expecting the both of us to receive basic income. Like, the odds of that are astronomical. And the difference it has made in our lives since receiving it. I started receiving it November of 2017. I almost couldn't believe it. It came in very quickly. I applied. 3 weeks later, I had my first basic income check, and I was shocked. I went from receiving $722 on ODSP and barely surviving to receiving $1,915 from basic income. My income has almost tripled, and I'm still shocked that I can actually do stuff now. As Nina was mentioning, I bought my first winter coat ever, and it wasn't just about being able to buy brand new. It was about being able to choose my winter coat, the color, the cut. It turns out I'm very partial to parka style. Love it. Not a huge fan of the fur hood, but I made sure it was removable. And to actually be able to be warm in the winter, to go about my day-to-day activities and not be shivering under like 3 sweatshirts and a thin coat, that, really doesn't do the work at all to help with that. It's been amazing. I was actually able to afford Christmas presents for my friends, something I've never been able to do because on ODSP, you don't get the funds to be able to share to purchase stuff for your friends for Christmas, for holidays, to say thank you. I've been able, because I do a lot of advocacy work in Ontario, and receiving basic income has allowed me to do my advocacy job better. I can better prepare and advocate because I can eat healthy now. I am eating healthily now. That's the number one compliment I keep getting from everyone is how much healthier I look. Prior to basic income, I was not healthy. I was I looked very unhealthy, ill most of the time, because I would go days without eating, surviving on coffee. Because coffee filled me, and I'm like, that good, I'll live off of coffee. And realistically, it's not healthy to live off coffee. It leads to bad times for your stomach and acid reflux, really bad times. And I wanted to mention, like, the difference, basic income, mental health. I have bipolar disorder, and the biggest trigger has always been the lack of finances. Every time the end of the month would come for ODSP, I would be having a full-blown bipolar episode because I didn't have the funds to survive that month. I'd pay my rent, my bills, and I'd be done. And that would be even if I could pay my bills in full, which companies are lucky that I'm lucky they'll accept half, and that'll hold off till the next month when I pay them another half as the bill grows bigger. I'm not having bipolar episodes as frequently. I haven't had a severe depressive episode since about October. My mental health is skyrocketing up in a better direction. I'm confident. I can eat healthily. My mental health is stable for the first time in years, and that comes down from just having a guaranteed income that has dignity attached to it and the freedom that isn't there with social assistance. Our Ontario Works, and I was asked to speak a bit about this, so I'm just going to mention this here, is our system in Ontario for social assistance is broken, and I'm sure it's not just Ontario that has a broken social assistance system. Singles on welfare are frequently $100 behind the minute they get their checks. They're already in the hole $100 minimum. Families are on their own. They're also being left behind. Everyone's being left behind on the current social assistance system. It's broken. It needs improvement. And frankly, I don't even think improvement would be the right way for social assistance. I wholeheartedly believe we should be moving forward with basic income. Basic income's the way to go. It attaches a guaranteed income. You don't have to jump through hoops to get that measly $500, $600. You just get that money, it comes in, you are able to survive. You don't have to worry about being suspended for a clerical error that your worker made a mistake on. And then you have to spend 2 weeks trying to reach your worker to get that mistake corrected, which isn't right, putting families in jeopardy because we all know children's services. If it's reported to them that you don't have food or you're in danger of losing your housing, that puts your kids at risk for being apprehended. And that isn't fair to anyone. That's why we need to move forward with basic income. Basic income is the way of the future, given the current technology advances. Everything's going to be made by robots at some point, and what are we humans going to do? There's only going to be so many jobs available for maintaining said technology. So we've got to work together and find a way to make basic income a permanent reality. One of the biggest things I have heard from a lot of my friends on basic income is that we all feel guilty because we're receiving this. We have dignity attached to our monthly checks, but our friends on social assistance don't. They're struggling. We all agree they should be receiving the opportunity that we have now, the stabilization of mental health, the stabilization of physical health. Everyone should have that opportunity, not just those of us who are lucky enough to have received the basic income pilot. We need to make basic income a permanent reality for not just everyone in Ontario, but on a nationwide level too, which, as I'm sure most of you are aware, Maclean's recently, the federal government was actually talking about a national basic income. And while the costs are currently projected at about $43 billion, my response to that generally is the costs of poverty in healthcare are ridiculously high. In 2017, the federal government spent over, if not close to, $240 billion in healthcare costs. And I have to wonder, how much of those healthcare costs are due to people living in poverty, not being able to eat properly, not having proper access to medical care? And one of the things I also have been meaning to research is the costs on our legal system, the amount of crimes that get committed because people shoplift something to eat for their children or a bag of diapers. How much of our legal and court system is being wasted on prosecuting people when instead of prosecution, we should be helping them, connecting them to the resources that can help with what they need. And I think I will finish off there in stating that that $43 billion number quoted is a drop in the bucket compared to the costs we're paying in healthcare alone and the consequences of poverty. We're spending much more on that than we are on helping people out of poverty. We are a first world country. We should not have poverty in our country. It should not exist anymore. And if we get rid of poverty, I'll die a very happy woman.
Wow. So she filled my cup this morning. I think the same can be said for everybody in the room. Thank you so much for that, Alana. No problem, she says. So she just said you can't change the world if you're not talking the truth of what it's like. So, wow. So two very inspirational speakers on the topic of basic income. My heart is full. I feel like I'm on The View. This is great. Maybe Ellen will come dancing in a minute. We'll see how this goes. So you just kind of left off on some of the benefits of what we could experience if we did have basic income, and I'd like to give my friend Sheila the same opportunity to respond. You touched on that as well, but just, from your perspective, what would be some of the greatest benefits that you would see if we switched to this type of programming?
So I think for me, Alana's talked a lot about the personal experience, but I think what she talked about towards the end and the difference that it made in her ability to connect with her community and to be able to do her volunteer work, for me, I think that's one of the most important things that we have to understand. A lot of the pilots are looking at what happens to individual behavior. What we learned from the India experiment that I didn't get to talk about very much, and from the Dauphin experiment where it was a saturation site, they learned that the community effects were huge, and that some of the changes that they noticed, improvements in health and education, for example, young people staying in school longer, women able to stay home with newborns for a little bit longer and not having to return to work. The magnitude of the change was larger than could be explained by the number of people who received the benefit. So there were, in high school, for example, there were peer effects. If a lot of the people receiving the basic income, if some of these kids had to pull out of school in order to keep the farm going or to, provide some income from some job somewhere to help the family. So if you get a number of those high school kids returning to school to grade 11 and 12 again, then their neighbors, who might have been thinking about dropping out too, they return as well. Accidents and injuries went down. So to me, it's this wider community effect that's so important, and the possibilities of community development, of really enriching communities that have started to fail or where economic opportunities have disappeared. If you have money back in a community, and you have an opportunity for businesses to develop. The economy grows and money moves, so it helps so many aspects of things.
So I have another question for Alana, and then I'm suspecting that the group may have some questions as well, and I'm aware of our time, so we're going to make sure that we have time for anyone to ask some questions of our speakers. Alana, you've just shared so much of your own personal journey, and I would say you definitely have earned a PhD and been there, done that. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective on an individual, a family, and a community level, what can you see as being some positive steps forward to help people step out of the poverty cycle?
Well, perhaps one of the biggest things I can say in my experience as someone who's lived in poverty and who works on an anti-poverty group, raise social assistance, fix social assistance now, because people on social assistance are honestly, in my opinion, part of the most vulnerable population in our society, and they are too often being left behind. And that's not right, and that's not fair for a country such as Canada. We are a country known for being kind and helping others, and yet we're failing our own people, our own children. Our next generation are the ones who are going to care for us when we're older, and they're going to look back and remember, how are we helping them now by keeping the social assistance rates where it is? We're not helping them, we're failing them. Social assistance needs to be fixed, whether that be implementing basic income on a provincial or nationwide level. We need to raise the income level, particularly for those on social assistance, as well as singles. And I mention the singles particularly because there are benefits for those who work, there are benefits for families, for couples, but the singles on social assistance are often the most forgotten about. They're the ones that are always behind each and every month. A single person on Ontario Works receives about $600. A one-bedroom apartment in Hamilton, Ontario is currently going from about $900 to $1,000. There's no way you can afford a one-bedroom being a single on welfare. On a community level, increasing donations to your local food bank to help with food security, volunteering at a food bank so that they can stay open a little bit longer to help that family, to look at perhaps innovative opening food banks on Sundays for those who are unable to make it during the week, those who are working hard, barely surviving on minimum wage, still need to access food banks, but they can't if the food banks are closed. If they're open on a Saturday or evening, that opens up to food banks to those who need them but aren't able to access them during the day. And community-wise, there is a lot more people volunteering in our community now. I'm a firm believer in share the wealth, so I actually donate a chunk of my, not a whole lot, because I'm very budget conscious, but I do donate each month, not only to the random people who are unfortunately panhandling downtown, but to various organizations, as well as Mac Children's Hospital, because that is very important to me on a personal level. And I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Alana. I'd like to open it up to anyone who might have some questions in the group as well. Oh, I see somebody back there. The microphone's coming to you.
So the basic income, is it only Ontario at this time that people can receive it, is the first question. And if so, do we know when perhaps some of the other provinces it'll be available? And then next, what are the parameters around applying for it? Because Alana, you mentioned that you were surprised that your mom was able to receive it as well as yourself. So what are the parameters around receiving it?
Okay, so that was a long question now. I'll answer the last part first. There's a research team that's involved in developing the methodology and, you know, the application process and who gets in and who's actually a recipient and who's part of the control group. So there's a whole research team that determined that. As Alana said, it's just sheer luck that, you know, the lottery kind of worked in their favor. As for where things are happening, so Ontario is the only jurisdiction that's piloting, and it's piloting in sort of 3 major sites. And there's somebody from Thunder Bay here who I met, which is another pilot site. Another is Lindsay. They're all really active communities, which is very cool. There are initiatives happening in Quebec that the Quebec government is calling a basic income. Our colleagues who work at Revenu de Base Quebec, the equivalent of Basic Income Canada in Quebec, are firmly of the view that they're calling this a basic income. It is not. It still has a lot of judgment and questions about deserving and undeserving applicants for this thing, so they're not very happy with that. The British Columbia government has committed to running a pilot, so we'll see how that looks in the future. But there's a lot of interest from different parts of the country. PEI is interested. There are many municipalities. A lot of mayors are very supportive of this and would like to see something happen. So I think it's for all of us to just keep the pressure on our governments, municipal, provincial, territorial, Indigenous governments, federal government, to keep pushing to make this a reality.
I would like to also say too, in regards to both me and my mom receiving it, I think part of the defining factor was we both came from different income streams. My mom was accepted from Ontario Works, and I was accepted from the Disability Support Program. So I think that played a major part in helping determining it, is that we were coming from different income streams. And just sheer luck, because realistically, what are the odds?
I know there's a mic moving around the room here. Here we go.
I have it here. Thank you for that illuminating presentation. You touched on this briefly in the myth-busting session, but hoping you can expand on it. The idea that if we put in basic income, then we don't need other social supports, that we can sort of do away with other parts of the social safety net. To what extent is that true, and to what extent is that a dangerous line of thinking?
Yeah, so that to me is really dangerous. I think people get confused by Milton Friedman sometimes, because he is, you know, by many people considered kind of the architect of the modern architect of this basic income idea. And he had a proposal for a negative income tax. It was quite miserly. But I think the most important thing about Milton Friedman was that he was quite anti-government. So he wanted the marketplace to rule. So you get your money, you go out into the marketplace, and that will somehow miraculously, you know, make things better for everyone. So if you believe that theory, that's fine. If you believe in unicorns, that's fine too. In reality, in Canada and in most of the developed world, outside of the United States, which is quite an anomaly, we have really well-developed public service systems. So in Canada and most countries with universal health care, and you know, if the time comes soon when we get pharmacare, then our health care will be complete. To have publicly subsidized child care, to have, you know, a whole range of other things in place that make it possible for everyone in a society to have things that none of us can buy by ourselves, you know, purchase by ourselves, like roads and highways and bridges and all of those kinds of things. So I think that, you know, those ideas of the welfare state, of what public services can deliver, is a huge complement to a basic income scheme. I think where people start to get nervous is when, I mean, and our organization does too, we talk about a reduction in service need. We talk about saving downstream. But that's not because we're advocating eliminating services that are necessary. It's because you're eliminating the need for those services, so that if Alana can have better teeth and better health and doesn't have to use health care quite so much, then we save, not because we're denying her something, but because everything is working better.
And I can honestly, and as someone who has mental health problems, we should never remove mental health support. That is too needed for everyone, both young and old today. We can't do away with it at all.
Thanks.
I'd just like to start by thanking Alana for your presentation. As a former refugee, I also sometimes share my personal story, and it can be really vulnerable and emotionally draining to be that open with strangers. So I just wanted to, again, just from the heart, thank you so much for doing this. But also to ask you, in doing this, what is it that you hope that we in the room do with what you've shared with us? So it's the why and what your hope is.
Well, thank you. It's a bit nerve-wracking at times, getting up to a large crowd. The biggest takeaway I hope people will take away from this is that we need to do better with our current income security system. Social assistance is failing. Basic income, in my honest opinion, is the way of the future. With the way technology and automation's going, we need to have a better system in place to catch those in our society who are falling further and further behind as each year goes on. And I would also like to thank Prosper Canada as well, because not only that I get to come out and share my story with everyone, and hopes that everyone can learn that without changing our vital income security structure by, say, moving towards basic income, we're just going to continue to fall further and further behind. But it also gave me an amazing opportunity that I honestly never would have had without basic income, and that's being able to come to Vancouver to speak to everyone here. I've never flown a plane before, so I honestly have to say I can't be the only one that has to resist the temptation to hold my hands up when the plane's descending and yell woohoo like a roller coaster. I can't be the only one that has to resist that. And it's thanks to basic income and being able to come share my story with everyone that I was able to have that experience, and that experience of seeing the beautiful parts of Canada that I honestly, poverty, I never thought I would be able to even leave Ontario, never mind come across to the beautiful British Columbia. And I hope that answered your question. Phenomenal. Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, and then we'll be moving into our break.
Yeah, thank you. Alana, this is basically a question for you, but Sheila, you can weigh in on it too. We're very much aware that this experiment or the pilot is going to take place for 3 years. And I'm just interested in how you're thinking about the future, because you know that at the end of the 3 years, it may be that you have to go back to ODSP. It may be that your mother would have to go back to the Ontario Works program. So is your future orientation such that you're thinking, what can you do in this 3-year period to make your life better for the rest of your life? Or are you, or do you have an expectation or a hope that after the 3 years that they would actually continue the process? So I'm interested in how you're thinking about the future.
Oh, absolutely. Since receiving basic income, the biggest thing I keep reminding myself is that this is a 3-year pilot. This is an amazing once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm going to make damn sure I invest in myself for a better future. I'm currently applying for college, as well as I received some advice from one of our lovely attendees about university. So I'll actually be going back home to McMaster to speak to someone there about the possibility of attending there, because I want to be able to use basic income as an opportunity to invest in myself for a better future, not just for me, but for my community. I do have a college diploma. However, I made the mistake of going to a private college, and I think most of us know the private college diplomas are utterly useless. No one wants to recognize them, so I'm going to go back to college and get a recognized diploma so that way I can better serve my community and better plan for a better future for myself. So that way, and I will, and this kind of goes to this as well, is prior to basic income, I never believed I'd be able to get out of poverty. I always, you know, you can work hard all you want, but when housing keeps rising, various other costs keep rising, the chances of actually being able to move yourself out of poverty is slim to none. Thanks to basic income, I have that hope. I have the opportunity that I will be getting out of poverty, and I am determined. I want to make sure as hard as I can that I do not go back to disability. I do not want to go back on social assistance. When the basic income program ends, I have no intentions on going back onto social assistance. Even if it means I have to work 3 to 4 jobs, I will do that versus go back to social assistance, because the amount of dignity I receive on basic income is outstanding and amazing. Astounding, that's how it is. I have a slight pronunciation problem, and some words are a bit iffy. It's an opportunity for myself, and I am making sure that I'm investing myself for the future. I do not want to let this opportunity go to waste, because as I'm sure most of you are aware, we're currently under election in Ontario, and even though all the parties say they support basic income and that they'll continue the pilot, there is some concerns that that may not be the case. So we're just gonna, most of us are putting some money aside just in case, and still looking towards the future, because I keep a very future-focused mindset with basic income.
And I would add just one thing to John's question, that in a lot of the consultations that we've done, and I was part of this federal cities tackling poverty process too, and talked to like a number of different people, and Alana's story is not alone. I mean, you know, everybody I talk to, especially the women, and especially women with children, are thinking very strategically about, you know, what happens in the next 3 years, how can we make the most of this? And if I can, just because this Indian experiment that I wish we had more time to talk about is really cool. One of the things that they did, and this is a very, very poor village, and they got, you know, very little money in their basic income. You know, amongst the first two things they did was built a public sanitation facility, latrine system, because nobody could do that individually in their homes. The second thing they did was build a fish farm that would way outlast the pilot, so that they would have an economic driver for their community well into the future. And, you know, so it shows the potential of the strategic decisions that have so much future potential for people, even if things end, although we don't want it to.
Thank you. So we are coming up to our break. I really want to encourage you to please just write down some comments, some calls to action for yourself that our speakers may have left you with, and just please join me in extending our gratitude to our wonderful speakers and change agents.
Go, Adam. Okay, so we have our break coming up, but just a few quick announcements. And I think just one reflection is that this morning was really important for us to be able to focus on our ends and our ultimate goal of actually reducing poverty. Financial empowerment is critical, but we're aiming for poverty reduction. And sometimes I think we get caught in a dialogue around the importance of income poverty versus asset poverty. And I think this morning was a reinforcement that it's not an either or. And it's so important. A lot of us use the quote of without an income you can't get by, but without assets you can't get ahead. And I think the conversation this morning just really reinforced that it is about both income and assets to ultimately create the future that we want to create in our country. So thank you so much, Neen, for moderating, Sheila for providing that important information, and Alana for the courage to share your story. Thank you so much. Okay, so I encourage you to check the message board outside. There may be a note, a question up there that you actually have the answer to, or you can help connect someone to. I also encourage you to check the ABLE committee board. Provide input in terms of what you need in your local community, or what you think we need together to move forward on this movement of financial empowerment. So the ABLE steering committee really wants to hear from you, and that's your opportunity to put down your input. Look forward this afternoon to the marketplace. So the marketplace sessions are full, and when we start up the marketplace session, you can all anticipate hearing some pitches. So all the presenters will have about 90 seconds to pitch their topic, idea, or just the discussion that they want to host. So the marketplace is a unique opportunity for learning this afternoon. And remember that the Dinsmore room is available. So if you don't want your networking break to be dominated by talking to people, and you need some quiet time, the Dinsmore room is available for that mellow time. So as we go into the networking break, this is time to connect, time to discuss what you've learned, and also your last time, if you haven't completed your bingo card, to get it done. It's a pretty big stack. Neen was helping people with some hints there. We got a pretty big stack of completed cards, so if you haven't quite completed it, this is your last chance, and we're going to be doing the draw just before the marketplace, actually, is when we're going to find out who won the trip to Hawaii or Costa Rica. And we are going into the breakout sessions directly after our break. So at 10:45, and probably go a little early because we know the breakout sessions can fill up pretty quick. So try to get there a little early, and we'll be starting promptly at 10:45. And then lastly, I heard this rumor. It's from kind of Louise from Momentum staff, so it may or may not be true. That there's a national text of the emergency texting system this afternoon. So if you get a text at like, I think 1:55, don't freak out because it's a test. So we just wanted to give you that heads up. Okay, so break time and then 10:45 for our breakout sessions.